This is Agent Mode AI. I'm Abby. We are recording on 20 May 2026, 3 days after the publication batch this episode walks. This episode airs the week of 6 September. By then, the three claims it tracks, AM155, AM156, AM157, have cleared their first review cadence, and the ledger entries on the holding page carry the live status. What we are going to do is walk the three pieces as one chain: credentials, surface, execution, and walk with the chain adds that no single piece names.
I'm Avery, the chain. Frame it.
Three pieces published on the agentmodeai.com Risk and Governance Register on 16 and 17 May 2026. AM155 read the Cyber Safety Review Board's April 2024 report on Storm 0558, Forward into 2026 Enterprise AI Agent Credential Practice. AM156 read the Samsung April 2023 ChatGPT Incidents Forward into 2026 Shadow AI Detection. AM157 read the May 2026 Framework Layer Prompt Injection CVEs Forward into 2026 Agent Execution Authority. The pieces were deliberately composed as a sequence. Credentials are stolen, the surface that uses the credentials is undetected, the execution that follows is host level.
Start with AM155, the credentials end.
The CSRB report on Storm 0558 is, on its surface, a postmortem of a specific 2023 breach at a specific cloud provider. The report concluded the intrusion was preventable and that Microsoft's security culture was inadequate. Microsoft published a technical investigation and remediation commitments. For most readers, the file closed there. The structural read is different. The 4 credential management failures the CSRB documented are the same 4 failures most enterprises are currently building into their AI agent identity programs.
Walk the 4.
First, the compromised Microsoft Consumer Key Signing Certificate, the MSA 2016 key, was issued in April 2016 and still in active use in summer 2023, 7 years past any reasonable rotation interval. Microsoft did not have an automated rotation policy for consumer signing keys. The CSRB called the absence of rotation policy one of a cascade of avoidable errors. Second, the key was extracted from a 2021 engineering crash dump that transited from Microsoft's production environment to its corporate environment. The boundary between those environments was supposed to prevent the transfer. The enforcement was procedural, not technical, and procedural enforcement doesn't block what the operator does not see. Third, the corporate environment's credential scanning tooling did not flag the signing key inside the dump. The dump sat available to anyone with access to the corporate environment. Fourth, in 2023, a separate intrusion compromised an engineer's corporate account. The threat actor retrieved the dump, extracted the key, and used it to forge authentication tokens. The forged token usage was not flagged as anomalous because Microsoft's own anomaly detection baseline did not exist for that class of usage. The intrusion was first detected externally by the U.S. State Department on 16 June 2023, 2.5 weeks after the access began.
Map the 4 onto AI agent identity in 2026.
Each failure has a direct 2026 analog. Long-lived API keys without rotation policy are the dominant AI agent credential pattern in enterprises today. Most agents authenticate with credentials that have no automated rotation, no documented maximum lifetime, and no broker layer to enforce expiry. That is failure 1. Agents that traverse dev, staging, and production with the same credential class, or worse, the same credential, are the dominant deployment pattern. Cross-environment promotion in most enterprises is not an explicit pipeline step that reissues credentials. It is a code config change that lets the same identity reach a new environment. That is failure 2. Secret scanning tooling in most enterprises in 2026 does not catch agent-issued tokens in logs, in crash dumps, in CI artifacts, or in developer workstation caches. The scanners are tuned for credentials issued by IAM systems with predictable formats. Agent credentials issued by application layer brokers or vendor-managed identity providers often do not match the scanner's pattern set. That is failure 3. Anomaly detection baselines for agent credential use do not exist in most 2026 enterprises. The issuance pattern is unprofiled. The usage pattern is unprofiled. A compromised agent credential used at a normal volume against a normal endpoint produces no signal because there is no baseline to deviate from. That is failure 4.
Why this matters more for AI agents than for traditional service accounts?
The blast radius is wider. A compromised service account that fetches data from one downstream system is bounded by that system's data scope. An AI agent that holds the same credential typically has tool use capability against many downstream systems, often with the ability to write, send, or transact. The Storm 0558 attacker used the forged tokens to read email. A compromised AI agent credential in a 2026 enterprise can be used to send email, file tickets, modify configurations, issue purchase orders, or call other agents. The token class trust boundary is the same. The actions a compromised credential authorizes are categorically larger. The procurement question that follows is whether the agent's identity primitive matches its action surface. Most 2026 deployments still authenticate agents with primitives sized for read-only data access.
That is the credentials end. Move to AM156, the surface end.
AM156 is built around Samsung's April 2023 ChatGPT incidents and the 2 May 2023 restriction memo. 3 Samsung Electronics employees in the Device Solutions Division pasted confidential information into the public ChatGPT interface. The reported categories were semiconductor source code, internal source code submitted for optimization, and a recorded meeting transcript submitted for summarization. The information was, by OpenAI's then-current consumer policy, retained for service improvement. The headline at the time read as a corporate policy story. The load-bearing detail is in the detection path. Samsung learned about the leaks through internal audit and self-report, not at the moment of the paste. The detection lag was 3 years ahead of where most 2026 enterprise shadow AI programs still operate.
Why the detection lag is structural?
Enterprise data loss prevention in 2023 was designed against 3 channel classes: email attachments, browser uploads to recognized file share services, removable media. Pasting text into a browser-rendered chat interface fits none of those classes cleanly. The browser session was permitted because the domain was not blocked. The exis was not a file, so attachment scanning didn't run. The destination was a generative AI service, a category most DLP rule sets did not yet enumerate. The result was a structural blind spot. Samsung did not have a procedural failure. The policy stack did not extend to the new exit channel. The Bloomberg report from 2 May 2023 has the corporate policy framing. The earlier Korean tech press reporting from The Economist Korea on 30 March 2023 has the operational detail on the 3 incidents. Both are referenced on the holding page.
Has a gap been closed in 2026?
Partially. The major DLP vendors have shipped generative AI channel detectors since 2023, browser extension hooks that flag pastes to known AI hosts, network rules that block or watermark traffic to AI service endpoints, endpoint sensors that flag generative AI process activity. The coverage is uneven. The browser extension layer works only on managed devices with the extension installed. Network rules work only against destinations the rules enumerate, which lags new AI services by weeks or months. Endpoint sensors work only against installed clients, not against web-only interfaces. The structural answer requires inventory of every AI-capable surface in the environment, not just every AI vendor. Most 2026 programs do the second and miss the first by 30 to 60% of the actual surface.
The pattern has inverted between 2023 and 2026.
In 2023, the dominant shadow AI risk was workers using unsanctioned tools. Consumer ChatGPT in a browser, a personal Claude account, a browser extension installed without IT approval. Samsung is the canonical 2023 case. In 2026, the dominant shadow AI risk is agentic capability silently activating inside already approved tools. Microsoft 365 Copilot agents acquiring write capability the deployer did not configure. Custom GPTs created by individual contributors against the corporate OpenAI account. MCP server connections that the approved IDE makes without an inventory step. The detection lag problem is structurally worse because the tool is sanctioned and the AI capability is opaque.
The 3 operational tests.
3 tests for whether a program has closed the Samsung gap. First, can the program produce a complete inventory of AI-capable interfaces in the environment, including approved tool feature flags, in under 24 hours when asked? Second, for a randomly selected confidential document type, semiconductor source, contract terms, customer PII, can the program trace which AI-capable interfaces an employee could plausibly paste that document into, and which of those interfaces have detection in place? Third, when an AI-capable surface is added to an approved tool by the vendor, a new agent feature, a new MCP endpoint, a new Copilot extension, does the inventory update automatically, or does it require a manual review cycle that lags the vendor release? Programs that pass all 3 have closed the Samsung gap. Programs that pass 1 or 2 have a structural detection lag that a follow-on incident will surface.
Move to AM157, the execution end.
AM157 walks 3 CVE disclosures that all landed within a single fortnight in May 2026. Microsoft Security Response Center published CVE 2026-25592 and CVE 2026-26030 against Semantic Kernel on 7 May 2026. The proof of concept in the public write-up is canonical. A single attacker-controlled prompt resolves to host-level code execution on the device running the agent. Ox Security published a supply chain advisory in the same fortnight covering Anthropic's Model Context Protocol (STDI) interface. The advisory documents that the STDI command injection path is present in every published MCP implementation, regardless of language, with the command line itself acting as the payload. A separate disclosure against WinServe 1.9544.26 showed a prompt injection path that writes to the local MCP configuration file and registers a malicious server entry that the IDE loads on its next session with no user interaction.
Why this is a framework layer problem, not a deployment layer problem.
The conventional treatment of prompt injection through summer 2025 placed the threat boundary between the model's output and the tools the deployer had explicitly registered. The deployer would restrict the agent's toolset, run the agent under a low-privilege account, block egress to sensitive systems, and trust the framework to keep the model's authored content separated from the configuration the framework executed against. That is what Microsoft's own threat modeling guidance documented through 2024 and 2025. It is what Anthropic's MCP specification assumed in the original protocol design. The May 2026 CVE class breaks this assumption at the framework layer. In the semantic kernel demonstration, the prompt injection authors a new tool configuration that the framework executes inside the agent process. In the MCP STDIO class, the prompt injection alters the configuration the agent uses to launch a server, where the command line itself is the payload. In the windsurf class, the prompt injection writes to the local MCP configuration file and installs a new server entry that the IDE loads on its next session. The three demonstrations share a single property. The framework, by default, treats tool configuration as data the model is allowed to author. The deployer's allow list is enforced against the configured tools, not against the model's ability to mutate the configuration. The patch surface is the framework default, not the deployer's configuration.
The structural reading from Microsoft's own post.
The Microsoft Security Response Center post is explicit about the structural read. The CVE class is described as a representative instance of an anti-pattern observable across multiple frameworks the team examined privately. The recommended mitigation is at the framework default, not the deployer's configuration. That is the load-bearing sentence from the disclosure, because it tells the procurement reader that the patch surface for this class of vulnerability is not under the deployer's control. The OX Security Advisory is the broader of the three because it traverses the protocol itself rather than a specific framework's implementation of it. The MCP STDIO command line construction issue is present in every published MCP implementation, regardless of language. The protocol level fix requires every published implementation to update.
How wide the affected surfaces?
Wider than the three named frameworks. The Microsoft post notes the underlying anti-pattern is observable across multiple frameworks the team examined privately. The OX Security Advisory documents that the STDIO command injection path is present in every published MCP implementation. The OWASP 2026 Agent Security Survey found 73% of live AI rollouts have prompt injection exposure, and only 34.7% have dedicated defenses. The operational implication is that a CIO reading the disclosure should assume the production surface is exposed until each framework in the stack is checked individually against the vendor's response.
Now the chain Avery presses. Walk the three together.
The credential layer produces stolen non-human identities with action authority that exceeds the audit baseline. The surface layer produces shadow agentic capability inside sanctioned agents, undetected by 2026 DLP. The execution layer turns prompt injection on those agents into host-level code execution at the framework's default trust boundary. The compromise sequence the three pieces describe is a long-lived AI agent credential leaks through a path the credential scanner doesn't see. The credential is used inside a sanctioned agent surface the Shadow AI program doesn't inventory, and the agent's framework executes attacker-supplied tool configuration as if it were deployer-authored. The deployer's allow list is bypassed at every stage. No single piece names this composite. AM155 walks the credential failure mode in isolation. AM156 walks the detection failure mode in isolation. AM157 walks the execution failure mode in isolation. The composite is the trilogy.
Holding up review on each. By air date, the ledger entries carry the life status. Walk the trigger condition so listeners can interpret what they read.
AM155 reviews on the 90-day cadence on 14 August 2026. Trigger conditions registered on the claim. A published industry survey showing the median AI agent credential lifetime drops below 90 days would move toward partial because the rotation gap is closing. A major AI agent credential breach with public postmortem would confirm or refute the structural map. A published CSRB equivalent review of an AI agent incident would be the closest analog to the original report and the most direct retest. AM156 reviews on the 60-day cadence on 15 July 2026. Trigger conditions. A published vendor benchmark showing DLP coverage of agentic AI channels above 90% on real enterprise environments would weaken the structural argument. A major 2026 Shadow AI incident with public postmortem would confirm or refute the structural map. A published Gartner equivalent assessment of enterprise Shadow AI controls maturity would retest the operational implication. AM157 reviews on the 60-day cadence on 15 July 2026. Trigger conditions. A published vendor benchmark showing framework layer tool configuration enforcement in default semantic kernel, MCP, and windsurf builds above 80% of measured surface would weaken the structural argument. A second independently disclosed framework layer CVE in the same prompt injection to execution class would harden the argument. A major 2026 production incident traceable to one of the three named frameworks would confirm or refute the operational implication. A framework vendor attestation program covering tool configuration as a privileged operation would weaken the structural argument because the procurement pattern has shifted.
The ledger entries on air date carry the verdict for each.
The verdicts are on the holding page. The structural reading we just walked does not depend on which specific marker fired. The chain itself, credentials, surface, execution, is the editorial point. Vendor responses inside the review windows refine the procurement template question, not the structural diagnosis.
Procurement Red Team editions. The three pieces together added how many questions to the AI MSA review?
3 families of question, 1 per piece, that the AM 155, 156, and 157 trilogy added to the AI MSA Red Team checklist. The full list extends what RES 05 documented in March 2026. These are the May 17th additions on top. From AM 155, the vendor describes the credential primitive every AI agent in the deployer's tenant authenticates with, the maximum credential lifetime under default policy, the rotation mechanism, and the anomaly detection baseline that exists for credential usage. The vendor commits to surfacing credential telemetry the deployer can integrate into its own SIEM. The deployer's procurement question is not whether the vendor has good credential hygiene in the abstract. It is whether the vendor exposes the operational telemetry the deployer's own SOC needs. From AM 156, the vendor enumerates every AI-capable surface the vendor's product exposes, feature flags, agent capabilities, embedded copilots, MCP endpoints, custom tool registration paths, and commits to notifying the deployer at least 30 days before any new AI-capable surface activates in a customer-visible release. The clause closes the inventory lag gap by making the vendor responsible for surface enumeration rather than the deployer responsible for vendor feature monitoring. From AM 157, the vendor attests that the framework treats tool configuration as a privileged operation, not as model output with a documented enforcement mechanism. Vendors that cannot attest are signaling that they have not yet shipped the framework layer fix, and the deployer is carrying the residual risk. The attestation requirement is meaningful even when the vendor's answer is no. The no is itself part of the procurement decision.
5 operational controls AM 157 mandates regardless of vendor response.
5 controls in priority order. First, framework version freeze on every agent in production at the Q2 2026 patched version baseline with explicit sign-off required for upgrades. Second, MCP server registration moved from per developer local configuration to a centrally managed allow list with cryptographic verification of server binaries, modeled on the package signing approach in enterprise package managers. Third, agent process isolation under a sandbox or container with explicit egress allow list and no inherited workstation credentials, which limits blast radius even if the framework is compromised. Fourth, telemetry capture of every tool configuration mutation with anomaly detection on configuration writes from agent processes, the operational analog of the credential issuance baseline AM155 specified. Fifth, the vendor attestation requirement in the procurement template. The first 4 controls are deployer side. The 5th is vendor side. Together, they move the May 2026 disclosure from a single quarter patch cycle into a structural change in how the deployer contracts for agent execution authority.
Verdicts as of the air date review.
AM155 status, AM156 status, AM157 status, all 3 on the holding page. Each entry shows the cadence, the next review date, and the trigger conditions that produced the current status. The trilogy reading we walked does not change with the individual verdicts. The composite is editorial, the verdicts are operational.
Final word.
The 3 pieces are the May 2026 Risk and Governance arc on agentmode.ai. They sit at credentials, surface, and execution, and together they describe the failure surface of an enterprise AI agent program. Each layer has independent structural gaps. Together, they compose the actual threat model that 2026 procurement is contracting against. The claims, the CSRB report, the Samsung incident timeline, the Microsoft Security Response Center disclosure, the OX Security MCP advisory, and the Windsurf advisory are linked at agentmode.com/holding.
Holding up. See you next Sunday.